Hello and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the inaugural NSCAC Presents Behind the Bench webinar series. We hope everybody is well, and we'll give a couple of minutes here for everybody to log in. We are excited to share this this content with you, and we think we have an excellent first webinar to kick things off. And of course, part of our mandate at the NSCAC is to bring good quality coach education and expert panelists and speakers out to all of our members. And so we're looking forward to doing that. Again, I'm going to give a couple of minutes to let everybody joining in. I can see the numbers bumping up to 20 right now. We'll wait just one more minute before we get started and introduce the person who I'll be interviewing today. And here's some information about Coach Micheal Findlay while you're waiting. So I think we'll just wait one more minute. I see a few more numbers popping up now, a few more people getting logged in. All right. So, Micheal, if you can hear me and see me, you go ahead and unmute yourself. All good.
I am here.
Yeah. All right. So, I will welcome Coach Micheal Findlay, who is a good friend of the National Soccer Coaches Association of Canada. I won't talk too much about his bio, other than to say that he has coached and worked at the highest levels that we have here in Canada and internationally, and presently still working at the new highest level, which is as the Director of Football Operations for the new Canadian Premier League. And of course, that's what he's here to talk about today. So welcome, Micheal. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak with us and all of our members here. And I will go ahead and turn it over now to the two of us who should be sharing the screen now.
Well, first and foremost, thank you to NSCAC and hello to all the participating coaches on this. Much appreciated you're taking the time to listen. I think we have a little bit of time right now in our lives, so this might be a beneficial time to do it in all those busy schedules. But great to see you, Richard. I hope everyone's well and happy to be here.
Right on. Okay, so before we get started, I'll let everybody know who's watching. We want this to be, educational, but also interactive. So please feel free to use the Q&A box if you'd like to type in a question, and if you'd like to, also you can use the chat box, and we'll kind of stop periodically if we, if there's a question that pops up. Really the questions, of course, are for Micheal, but anything that he'd like to answer if and when questions come up. So please feel free to do that. And I think it's about time that we go ahead and get started. So as I said, I gave a brief introduction to Micheal, but I'm just going to start. If you can just let us know, let the audience know a little bit about your background, Micheal, as a coach, and how did you go from getting started in the game to now where you are with the Canadian Premier League?
Yeah, I mean, it's as it said in that bio, who is this guy? It's about a journey and it's about all the lessons, but my interest and my involvement in the game, started with my family and being an avid footballer. My mom and dad are immigrants from Scotland. My dad is a diehard Queen of the South supporter. If any of you are out there, I think there's like 3 of you actually in
That's
Canada.
very obscure. Yeah.
Yeah, very obscure. But that was the game that was chosen in our household. And, I aspired to be a professional player as a young person. And as many of us at the end of the day were not good enough. So I moved on from the game at that moment in time when my dad told me one morning, I think you should get a real job. And so I entered life outside of football. And I actually left football for a number of years. I sort of lost the passion. I think it had a lot to do with the disappointment of maybe not making the grade and what comes with that. But my journey to today really started with a very random meeting in my community with my former high school librarian, a guy by the name of Jim Crook. A great guy, a great lover of football, and a great servant to my former high school, West Vancouver Secondary School. And we just were chatting, and he hadn't seen me, and said, how's it going? You went off to the UK, the United States, to chase a dream. How did it go? We just got chatting, and I said, how's it going there? And he informed me that the school was canceling the football program, soccer as they would call it, but I call it football. Canceling the football program. And I said, oh, really? That's too bad. What's going on? And he says, well, we don't have a coach. And right on the spot, I just said, well, I'll do it. And he looked at me, he said, really? I said, yeah, I mean, if you're going to cancel the program, I'll do it. And so that was the inaugural step towards becoming a coach and entering this journey that took me from, as they say, a high school coach into the local VMSL out here in Vancouver as a player coach with a former club by the name of the West Vancouver Trollers, Mark Watson's old club, Waddy, a number of players that have been through the system, and then moved on to BC Soccer as a staff coach there. A great friend of the NSCAC, Mr. Tony Waiters, was kind enough to sponsor me in my quest for deeper education through the FA and through UEFA. So I have a great amount of admiration and thanks to Tony for helping me in that. And then it was just a staircase approach to moving through the system until I took up the Director of Football Development with BC Soccer and the old NTC program as a West Director. Started actively involved with national youth teams with Stephen Hart, and moved on from there, Rob Gale, all the way through the age systems until I was lucky enough to be approached by the former national team coach, Benito Floro, who had met with me and asked me to join his staff as his assistant and guide to Canadian football. And we moved on from there, and like all great coaches, we end up getting fired. So that's the way I look at it. And I was lucky enough to be approached by the Canadian Premier League, Jim Easton, a former national team player for Canada, who is the vice president of football operations. It's now, we'll talk about this maybe it's now called the development department, but he approached me about player acquisition, identification, and recruitment because of being a national team coach and knowing a number of where the players were. And so that's how I got involved. And I've now moved to the point where we've reorganized the back end of the Canadian Premier League. So James is more responsible for our long-term strategies and activities around the entire league. And I've taken on this role currently on the football development side as the director.
Okay.
That's kind of how I got there. There's probably a lot in between, but that keeps us on track.
That's the Coles Notes version. Yeah.
That's the Coles Notes.
Great to to see that you got started as a coach almost because there was no one else to do it.
Correct.
Maybe that's a common denominator among a lot of Canadian, North American coaches, and you can see you can get all the way to the highest level from there. So fantastic.
And Richard, and I tell you, that's a really good point. And I would say to all the participants here and all the listeners, Canada has an enormous challenge in front of it, both being or attempting to be a professional player, but also to potentially be a professional coach. and being in part of the industry. And what I would say is I take to any discussion or anybody I sit with, whether it's a 1v1 coach mentoring program or within a program I'm involved with, I always make it very clear that, there are examples of possibilities. And I certainly am one to tell you that, as I said, I was a high school coach in my community, and I ended up, standing on the sidelines in World Cup qualifying at Azteca and then ultimately being the interim head coach. So all of these things are possible, and you have a journey along the way, but never think it's not possible, because it definitely is.
Great. That's great. Great advice and positive feedback. And I think we'll get back to that in a little bit. So now I want to just switch gears a bit so we can talk specifically about the Canadian Premier League, because obviously you've had a real inside look at everything that's going on and on the pitch and off. So I'd like to, ask you if you can summarize, let's say from the 2019 season, what were some of the highlights, the positives, and then you can share some information about some areas that potentially areas for improvement.
Sure. First and foremost, probably the highlight of the entire 2019 Canadian Premier League season was the inaugural game, actually kicking off. Yeah. And I don't think I'd be far off saying there was a lot of people within our own football community, which quite frankly is a challenge at times. We have a tendency to cannibalize ourselves in Canada when it comes to football and football activities and respecting our own abilities and enhancing those. There was a number of people thought that it would not be possible. We've tried this before. It's not going to work. You can't do that. It's geographical challenges. And a lot of credit goes to the ownership group, the board of governors of the Canadian Premier League, of the inaugural group that established it, to be able to say, look, we had a sound business model. We had a vision. We had the ability to connect the appropriate people in the appropriate areas of the industry, and they were quite positive they were going to do it. So just kicking off itself was probably the highlight. And then from there, I think what I would say was the fact that when we did our end of the season, data analysis and review, it's the fact that the mandate of this league was for Canadian players to get an additional platform to what they already had, but one that would give them a far-reaching opportunity to become professional footballers. And, we had over 60 new professionals enter the game in Canada, which we did not have before the previous season. We had over 125 Canadians participate in our domestic league. And I think that's a critical point. It's our league. It's Canada's league. It is run by Canadians, and it is governed within the country of Canada under our own domestic rules and guidelines. So those, for me, were the highlights, because as a national team coach through the youth system and through the senior system, one of the great challenges was minutes. On numerous occasions, I would be selecting players that had very limited minutes in the professional arena and platforms and match play. And that always came back to bite us in the ass, quite frankly. And so we need more minutes. We need more opportunities professionally, both from a training perspective and a match perspective. So this now kicking off, and obviously there's an asterisk on our current activity because of the obvious COVID crisis that we are all dealing with. But it was such a positive moment in Canadian football history. And I've said in numerous interviews and discussions, this is the greatest challenge and the most important project that Canadian football has ever undertaken. And I include that in the 2026 World Cup activity, because that is one part of a greater establishment of a community and an industry. The World Cup will come and will blow us up a bit and really get us going, but then it's an event and it shuts down and it leaves. We need future, we need consistency and accountability, and you only can do that through your own domestic league product.
Fantastic. Yeah. And I can say, just briefly about, I watched, the opening match, didn't get to watch it live, unfortunately, but it really was a fantastic milestone, to reach in Canadian soccer, and definitely, speaking specifically about the league, that clearly a mandate of the league, and something that's super important in Canadian soccer, is to provide more opportunities to Canadian players. And even through just my own experience, having worked at the TFC Academy and in the national teams programs, and you look at the rosters of a lot of the CPL clubs, and you see former Montreal Impact Academy players, you see former Vancouver Whitecaps players, you see players that have maybe tried and gone to Europe and didn't make it, and then you've got a lot of younger, maybe up and coming players that just because of the limited professional opportunities in Canada before never had a chance, never would have had a chance. So it's clear that that's the mandate, and maybe that leads to sort of the next question that I have for you, Micheal, which is, let's say, can you give maybe a little more insight into specifically what is the league doing, what are the clubs doing in order to maximize the opportunities available to Canadian players?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, the Canadian player is the dominant, playing the dominant role in the league. As many of you may know or may not know, we do have a domestic player rules in place. We run with a 23-man squad roster requirement max. Out of that, 16 of them must be Canadian, 7 of which can be internationals, and we also have under 21 playing time rules and numbers rules. What we are doing from the league position is we are trying to find as many opportunities to what I like to call plug the black hole of football. And the black hole of football from our perspective is that 17 to 21, 22, 23, somewhere in there. It's not an exact science, as we all know. We try and narrow it down, but basically that black hole of football where you've just noticed, and I can guarantee you many people that are tuning in here have been involved with players who have shown great possibilities, have abilities and potential, and probably have traveled with these teams and seen them compete against other players and teams around the globe and said, our players are as good as these players, but we always lacked that next step within the process. And now that we have, if you include the 3 professional clubs that exist within the Major League Soccer, and now you add our 8 franchises, there's 11 pathways and opportunities for players to exist. So what we're trying to do in support of that is try to plug these holes, whether that be through a very unique program that was introduced. One of Jim Easton's original ideas was the U Sports program, being able to target a group of university players who may have chosen education as a pathway, but still have the opportunity to play professional football without losing their eligibility. Very groundbreaking, and we're hopeful that this will grow as not a predominant role of the player recruitment strategy, but it's another piece in the puzzle. Our domestic scouting program that goes on. We have Aaron Nielsen in our office who oversees our domestic scouting database. We are working behind the scenes to make sure that we can gather as much information as possible regarding all of the Canadian players that exist by using an online tool that we're in partnership with a company out of Portugal, where we hopefully over a period of time will share with all of our partners across the nation in terms of working on the same platform of putting a data dump in about these players, so we find them much more readily available, which we can share with our clubs. On top of that, it's about our development office, who we work diligently behind the scenes that look at how we can best support our clubs and their technical departments. There's financial restraints and realities that we deal with. We are not the Premier League, we're not Major League Soccer, and we don't supposed to be at this moment in time, but we do want to make sure that we can service our technical departments as best possible with helping them to build out to become much more robust. So that's in all things that are performance, on field, player ID, match analysis, as I say, player recruitment, and the opportunity more than anything, because that is the one thing that the Canadian Premier League presents all Canadian players, which you can't get in a lot of other arenas of play, and that is the opportunity to actually participate.
Fantastic, yeah, and I just maybe for anyone who's listening, first of all, I'll just remind everyone again, please feel free at any time, use the Q&A box or the chat box if you've got questions, for Micheal, of course. beyond this, the questions that I have. And maybe just before we move on from that, Michael, if you can just clarify, because I was taking notes while you're talking. I know we've spoken about this before, but so 16 of the 23 on each CPL club roster must be Canadian.
Correct.
Correct. And what's then the I guess the guideline regarding younger players specifically?
3 under 21 players, and they must play 1,000 minutes during the season.
Yeah, and so
And in 2019, all the teams met that. I wouldn't say all of them at the same speed. Others were more successful than others, but all of them did make that benchmark, which is important for us moving forward.
Yeah, and and I know you did touch on that concept of the black hole, the kind of 17 to 20 age category, and it's like without getting into all the details, I mean as well, when you go anywhere else in the world, I mean the best players are playing professionally with men at the age of 16, 17, and for sure before they're 20. So I think it's really important for coaches.
Yeah, and I'm sure that and if you look and questions are being asked by the participants here today, I think it's important also to know that we firmly believe that we have a process both from our international recruitment, which we can touch on a little bit after, but in terms of our domestic recruitment, we are not, as I said, other leagues and historically have the foundations that a Bundesliga or a La Liga have, or a Premier League, any of those types of leagues, and even the MLS in current form in terms of its investment into, for example, youth football. We're in a position to say that we are not looking to be a competitive component to already established structures. We feel strongly that the players that are being developed at the lower levels, in the youth levels, are gaining ground, good direction, oversight by the national body as it relates to the club licensing program, and the development of a high performance leagues at these levels. And we feel that we are there to look to build a fishing pond where our clubs can look to try and fish for those players. The important portion that we look at is what will we do with that black hole? And one of our current strategies includes, if some of you are living in the provinces of Ontario or Quebec, you have League One, which the Canadian soccer business has direction over, and you have PLSQ in Quebec, very competitive second tier levels of football that participate in the Canadian championships. And we're hopeful to see expansion of that type of play across the country as time comes, because that's where we feel there is we can build a new bridge in this whole process, where these players can participate and potentially move up into CPL activity. And if they're not reaching that capacity, they can move back down into that level of play. So trying to build, again, I like to use the staircase approach, is can we build stairs that are much more achievable than going from one and then having to take a huge jump to get to the next one. We need to fill in those stairs, and we feel strongly that area of the game is one of the most important ones.
Great. Okay, so I want to look at some of the questions that have popped up, because there's some fantastic ones. So we've got so Mike Aquino, and if I'm understanding the question properly, he's kind of saying that he likes the idea of the country establishing a U20 or up to U23 national league, where players from that league would be scouted to play in colleges and universities, and maybe that kind of ties in the black hole concept, and so like, I guess what are your thoughts on that? Is the CPL sort of filling that void as well?
Yeah. I think that's exactly where we look at it. I don't think you can change. We would love to see a bandwidth of play across the country. Now, that may not include some other areas at this moment in time because of numbers and finances things. But if you can start to target the appropriate areas within the country of where you have massive amounts of programming and players, can we create an activity level for these players to participate before they make that next step?
Sure.
Without endangering the concept of building a club mentality below who would be participants in the Canadian championships. So we may have a situation where each of our clubs could in the future drop a team into that level of play that were U21s or U20s or U23s. I'm not going to say what age group at this point because we probably don't know, but it definitely would be in that category. And they would at least have an area to participate. We don't see the value in large investments in academy football. It just, the numbers will tell you the value in that, given that our early development as a league is not the best way to use our money, given the already established infrastructures I mentioned and what we're doing in that level of play across the country. It's trying to have an opportunity for them to pop out of there and play in the next level, that and have it consistent, standards based.
Yeah, so that's great, and I know that kind of touches on the question from Diarmid here, which is there a plan to add youth academies or reserve teams? So I think you've answered that question.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and again, I'm not saying academy football is bad because it's been in existence around the world. But guess what? The modern day is telling you that there is another way to do this, and certainly from a financial perspective, which is on our minds all the time. And if you just look at the numbers of production around the world, academy football is supported by big player transactions. And those types of things. So until you can garner that type of revenue to offset it, it's not a fiscally responsible thing for us to be doing at this moment in time, given, as I keep saying, we do have established infrastructure we could partner with and hopefully improve.
Yeah, and it's, I think maybe important for everyone to think about, just because it works in, in Portugal or Italy or Germany, Canada's a little bit different. And so great. Okay. I do. There's a couple of Q&A questions that have come up. So Koss, one of our directors here, has asked thoughts on conducting combines or aligning with school boards to organize all-star games and generate interest in a pool of players that could have slipped through the cracks. So what do you think about that?
Excellent idea, and something that we've addressed on a number of occasions. Again, in our office, Anthony Totera, who many of you may know, he oversees our community relations part of our department, and part of his responsibilities is to reach out and look to have these showcase type games. An example of one would be last year in Montreal during the U Sports draft. We had an Ontario-based group play a Quebec based group for all of the CPL coaches to view. This is part of our greater scouting system, hopefully nationally from a footprint point of view. We've had these type of games in Ontario before. The original Got Game series kind of fit into that scenario, but which had a high degree of marketing attached to it rather than necessarily player development and ID, but we did see some players come out. And our plan was, before our COVID situation, was we would be out west and we would be doing the same thing in British Columbia and Alberta. So yes, as it relates to showcase games, as it relates to school boards, those types of things, that currently hasn't been on our discussion list at this moment in time. We're more looking at working with both the provincial bodies and some of their activities below, high performance leagues, those types of areas.
Yeah, great. And I think, again, I've mentioned, just through less than 6 degrees of separation that I'm connected with a lot of players and the coaches in the league, and it really is, a league which is providing opportunities at all levels, right? And I think it's a good message to continue to get across that, previous to this league existing, there were lots of Canadian players that probably felt they never got an opportunity. And, we'll a little later on in the discussion, I think we will get into that a little more specifics of what coaches and players can do. I do see a great question here from Farzad Yousefian. So he's a colleague of mine, sports scientist, and he's asking a question about the scouting tool. So it's actually maybe a three-part question here. So he's asking what type of data is collected, for example, physical, technical, tactical, coaches' notes, etc. Is the data collected from players who are already in professional settings, or can it be extended to youth and high-performance non-pro clubs to allow for recruitment? And how is the data used for recruitment? So long question there, but yeah.
No, I get it. Well, we are a big believer and supporter of all of the modern day practices that are being undertaken and in use in football, data driven. Oliver Gage oversees our player recruitment inside our department, along with newly addition Stephen Scott. We are collecting as much data as we can. We are trying to specifically develop different types of delivery scenarios. I talked about the scouting platform, which the vision of that would be, it would include a number of the things that he's just mentioned. And during our partnership activities with each of our provinces, we want them to use that system so they can upload that scenario so it can be shared amongst the clubs and their technical departments. And then as it relates to the physical training and the science of football, a number of our clubs are using apparatuses and technical and technology to assist them. Again, there's fiscal realities of that in some capacities, but the vision of the department would be, as we build out those more robust club technical departments, it all feeds into one mainframe. So you have an easier application to share and gather. So it's a work in progress, but completely agree with the opportunity with sharing information to generate a better player selection ID and ultimately recruitment strategy.
Sure, and maybe ultimately down the road, you kind of have a sort of the key performance indicators or the best predictors of whether or not players are going to be able to meet the standard in the CPL, and then maybe below that the other levels below that. So that sounds good. I've got another question here. So this is Ramon, and maybe we're getting back to the idea of academies. So maybe if we can touch on this question again. He says, why do you think academy systems in Europe wouldn't work in Canada? He mentions that in the MLS, they build academies. They are promoting more players to the first team and able to sell them to Europe. And besides, clubs would benefit from FIFA training compensation and solidarity mechanisms to increase revenues with some players. So, maybe for anyone.
No, I get it. And quite often I've been accused or talked about that I have some sort of anti-academy position. I said, I don't. I just know that I've spent time watching the process, and yes, there are examples of successes. And as it relates to Europe, I'm not saying it doesn't work. What I'm saying is we're not in the same position as a club in Holland or a club in Germany, where their revenues are generated by massive television agreements. They're generated by player on sales to fund this. At this moment in time, we can't do this. And one thing that we need to be very clear about is we are not in the business of pay to participate as a professional organization. The moment you charge your players, you are not a professional club. So we have always stated to our clubs, we do not want to be in that business unless it is in a supplementary training idea, summer camps, those types of things that are more about football in the community, not masking it as some development pathway or academy. Okay. So if it's going to be done, it's got to be done right, which means there's got to be a large amount of investment put into it, which we do not have at this moment in time. Yeah. And we've looked at the numbers, and the numbers are telling you that the ROIs, or the return on investments, does not match what we are seeing in terms of actual play. There's more success in our domestic level of play in terms of opportunities for players to play than graduating academy players throughout North America currently. So we've provided that jump area because the clubs aren't able to sign every one of their academy products. That's just a reality. It's not that they maybe don't want to. They have to make decisions on what they feel their game model is and what the benefits are going to be to their club long term. What happens to all the other players? So that's where we see our pathway and our opportunity to give them that. Now, down the road, are we able to structure something or create something that benefits that based on that word academy? Potentially, but we don't believe we're at that. We'd rather build the largest fishing pond or / the largest academy in the world, which is the country, and let our clubs fish in those areas, and provide that opportunity in that area where we really think the performance development is. If we're doing it right at the bottom, because all these players are coming through and getting opportunities, what haven't we been doing right? And I think what we haven't been doing right is a domestic league and a supporting second level of play.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And I know I had mentioned before, I mean, if you look at the rosters, there's just so many former MLS Academy players and those types of, that didn't get into the MLS, right? So and they're Canadian, right? So
Yeah.
there's clearly there's something there for sure. And I don't know maybe how you feel about this, Michael, that I'd made a note about. There's almost like a chicken and egg kind of mentality that, like, do you need to invest lots of money in order to develop players, or do you need to start to develop and get some success first in order to earn the investment? And sounds like a little more the latter, if I'm understanding correctly. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I've done, and I think maybe some of your participants saw a presentation I made about winning culture, and I'm a firm believer that you don't build a winning culture, you build a culture to win. So that kind of plays to that, is that we need a culture, we need an industry, we need commercial activity and support around it to move forward in some of these initiatives. And so until that maybe gets to the level that we're comfortable with, we feel very, very pleased about the activities that we're doing and what we see as our vision, which is, as I say, the pathway and opportunities for these players.
Right on. Yeah, great. And I'll say I wrote an article just if Canadian soccer fans are interested in this, that probably the best way that we can build a little bit more momentum and potentially get more investment down the road is for Canadians to support the league, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
go watch them live.
Well, bums and seats, no doubt about it. But I will say this too. I mean, you can ask your listeners. I think I did it at one of your scenarios and say that one of the great commercial successes of the Canadian Premier League is our work. This is not my expertise, so I won't go on about it. But certainly, I see the value in our partnership with MediaPro out of Spain, and who then formed the One Soccer channel in Canada. And my first statement to anybody all the time is they say, oh, well, this is doing this. We're not doing this well. We're not doing this well. And I always say, are you a subscriber to One Soccer? And they kind of look at you and you go, well,
What's that?
that's pretty much, maybe you should investigate that, because that channel is going to be our delivery vehicle for many years as it relates to football in this country, whether it be men's professional, women's national team program, men's national team program, Canadian championships, Chinese Super League, Liga MX, potentially CONCACAF activity down the road. So we do have platforms, from the broadcast industry that is helping drive us, but I think they would like that support. And sometimes, as you said, Richard, we have a tendency to eat our young a little bit.
Right on. Yeah. So I want to move on. There's a few questions, but just I've got one question I'd like you to touch on first, which is, again, in your role, Michael, as the director of football operations, and you're sort of overseeing what's going on the pitch and everything. So maybe can you comment just about the league? Let's say in 2019, in the inaugural season, what is it that stood out to you, technically, tactically?
Sure.
From the league play, from the strategy and tactics, coaching, etc.
Well, let's start with just the product itself. I was pleasantly surprised on the level of play, the competitiveness of the games. If you look at our final standings, yes, we had two teams that definitely were heads and shoulders above some of the other teams. But at the end of the day, between the third place team and the seventh place team, there was only 6 points. That's a 2-game swing. That tells you, in sort of the meat of the sandwich, there was some quality there and competitiveness that is required in a league. Certainly, Forge and Cavalry displayed a much more successful season, and that goes down to the clubs themselves, the ownership, Tommy and Bobby's oversight of those teams, and the players they ultimately selected, because that's where you're going to be judged on your performance side. As it relates to the actual play on the pitch, if I was going to sort of break it into two parts, player versus team, what we saw first and foremost was a standard piece of Canadian football that has been consistent throughout the years. Tony will tell you this from his days pre-86. We will always have big hearts. We were all physically well prepared and quite dominant. So that did not leave the football DNA of the Canadian player in the Canadian Premier League last year. There was a definite physical domination, which was really around strength and power from that point of view. We saw a great amount of what I call external players. And I'll touch on the internal side in a minute, but the external player being the one that uses his physical domination from the wide areas. His view of the game and his actions are geared to the peripheral, right? And we all know that at the end of the day, pitch influence is critical, and successes come from central positions mostly when you look at the reviews and the data and the successes. It's that through ball, it's that combination play, it's that, as they call, zone 14, whatever we want to call it these days. So that's what we generally saw. What we're driving for is we'd like to see a more balanced approach. Physically, we'd like to see a much more dominant area in both, not just the strength and power, but in the speed and agility. So can you combine that acceleration, deceleration factor with all your components physically while you're in competition? I mean, that sounds grandiose, but we'd love to see more of that type of player. As you know, you've got that one. You're in you're the expert, Richard. I think you understand when I say, you've got that one who's on the train all the time, boom, boom. But can we get a little bit more of a pliable type of player that can combine all of those activities in whatever actions they do? And we'd love to see more internal players, that can combine with your external expertise. So you have a much more broader stroke to the game. Do they see the field from a 360-degree portion? Are they able to work in chaos? Can they combine? Are they able to penetrate vertically, running with the ball and passing the ball? We'd like to see more of that. And then it'd be sort of where they're influencing the game. And when we looked at our data and you looked at where players were influencing the game, they weren't close enough to the goal. Sounds very basic, but we had a lot of nice interaction and a lot of nice play, but did we have enough in the critical areas? And I've always said, what we lacked and have lacked over years, and we seem to be seeing improvement in that, is do you have the critical ability in the critical positions at the critical times? So those are things we're driving for, and we're seeing a lot of our players at the highest level nationally are showing that ability to do so. Can we work with our players and our domestic groups below to do that? As it relates to the teams, I think when you look at the teams, I think the three things that come to mind are consistency. Can we have a more consistent model of play from each of our teams? All of them had very good and strong and well-researched game models. All of our teams are very well coached in terms of that. We only had one team turn over a coach this year in Pacific, but the general concept is they're very well coached and organized. But can we have a little bit more consistency in terms of what sort of game model they have and what formation they use to deliver that? Because and that is the inaugural year, remember, right? And in doing so, does that give us a much better presence defensively on a coordinated press or a coordinated hold or a coordinated block? And are we able to influence the game in much more of a central position and higher up the pitch, right? There were at times you'd see our games, lots of gaps, lots of space. And that is just working more with the players and trying to find, as I say, that consistency, that whole idea of bringing it to the competition platform on a regular basis. We saw some great goals, and that's what the game's about. So we do have the ability to do that. But again, can we raise that ability? Can we have a much more technically competent group of players on a more consistent basis? Sounds simple, like everybody would think that, but that's exactly what the data tells us.
Yeah, and I'll thank you for a really detailed yet brief answer to a complicated question. And of course, we could go on forever. And I really like the the concept of the internal player.
Yeah,
And maybe, you know, part of the reason that the gameplay looked the way it looked is because in Canada, we struggle a little bit to develop those kind of players. And even
correct.
physically, I'll speak just briefly for,
Yeah,
you know, what I can say is the best way to get players that are really dynamic physically, agile, able to play in and out in the middle of the field, and is to play more soccer, not to do
yeah,
more running
absolutely.
training. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's
So,
very, you know, the training environment must be related to match. I've always believed this.
yeah.
I've always been a big believer for many years. After watching a number of the opportunity to watch a number of international coaches, how important sequential training is.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is there should always be an action at the end of whatever element you're using within your sessions. So it's not a static scenario. So if it's passing with what? A shot, a cross, a retention. Is it possession with a goal or a shot or a change of point? Whatever it is, there's always should be a sequential activity within your session, which is match
Got
play.
it. Yeah, great. And so I'll be conscious of time, and you know, there's a
Sure.
few other questions I'd like to get to, but just before we do that, I want to, because I know we had some members that spoke to us even before this we went live here, that maybe if you can give some specific guidance to, first of all, aspiring players, you
Mm-hmm.
know, that want to play in the CPL. What advice and it's, you know, maybe specific advice can you give to them? And then if we've got coaches out there that you know are coaching talented players wherever they may be, big club, you know, small academy, whatever it is, you know, what can players and coaches do in order to get themselves seen for
Mm-hmm.
to play in the CPL?
Sure. First of all, from a player's point of view, because it's at the end of the day, I've always been a firm believer that it is about the players. You don't have players, you don't have a game. Again, a little bit of a romantic comment, but it's true. You know, from a player's point of view, this is about taking the opportunities that are provided to you. And it's also taking the opportunities that have been taken away from you. I've always said that the football is a very cruel sport at times. It's based on selection, based on opinion, based on physical condition or not. But one of the great things about the game is it always gives you another opportunity to recover because there'll be the next game that you play in. So you need to understand as your players need to see this as a journey. It's not always going to be a smooth journey. And what I would say is I always encourage players to search out the best possible atmospheres that they can challenge themselves. This is can be a comment on some of our industry and some of our coaches out there that at times we can be a little bit egocentric, and that we have a tendency to want to protect certain players because we feel ownership and we feel that they're part of us instead of maybe being part of the journey, which means you've got to transport that player to the next level where they're going to get the best possible competition and the best possible opportunity to be assessed. As it relates to CPL directly, that comes back to us trying to plug these holes as I talk about. For example, if you come out of a high performance league in Canada or somewhere else in the country that may not have one, can you search out that next level of play? Currently, the League One concept, the PLSQ concept, hopefully, as I say, BC League One in 2021, and maybe other provinces looking at the same thing. Search out the next level of play where you know the Canadian Premier League has had their has their eyeballs on it, and uses technology to gather information on all you players. The other thing is don't be afraid of taking chances for players. Opportunities that are presented to you. It may be down the university route, and that's why U Sports was a very important program for us, is that we saw players who were not selected at a number of different levels. Doesn't matter if it was academy level at MLS or another club or even a League One or PLSQ, wherever it may be, or somewhere in Europe, but they've come back, they've entered the U Sports program, and they've got an opportunity. So don't turn away from these opportunities. It's our job to provide you with hopefully that exit strategy at all of the opportunities. And it may sound incredibly easy to say, but it's about hard work. You know, being a professional footballer is not easy, and it never will be easy. And to be frank, the vast majority of the players who enter the game do not become professional footballers.
Yeah.
So they need to understand that it's about hard work. And it's about making sure you take every opportunity you can to learn something about the game. Because I know all your coaches are probably saying right now, my goal is to make sure that the player who's in my atmosphere is better when he leaves than when he or she came in. And so the player must be able to recognize that and take that chance and take that opportunity to learn from the coaches that are providing them that guidance. As it relates to the coach, we do say that CPL was all about players, absolutely, number one priority, opportunity, but it was also about creating an industry and a culture around football in Canada. So when you look at the amount of executives, you look at the amount of administrators, you look at the amount of coaches, support personnel, whether they be specialists like yourself, Richard, and many of your attendees in the physical preparation or the therapy area, whatever that may be, referees, stadium personnel, broadcast personnel. All of this is about building opportunity. And these opportunities were not available prior to 2019. So when I tell your coaches, I say, look, don't be afraid to reach out. Don't be afraid to take the opportunity. And don't be afraid to sacrifice, because there's basically 4 principles for me when it comes to coach development. It is education, it's sacrifice, it's having a core set of principles, and being very panoramic about what you look at, and take that and know that expansion will come in the CPL whenever that may be, but it will come. Which means there'll be more opportunities, and take the opportunity that's presented to yourself, and don't be afraid to make that leap of faith, per se, as long as it fits into your personal and your family guidelines and principles. That's the best way from my point of view.
Once again, great advice and great wisdom for sure. And I will say, again, just briefly that really, these opportunities, especially from youth sports or, in Ontario, any from League One and the other high performance leagues, I mean, they're there. So if you get into, as a player, if you get into, one of those environments and you become one of the top players in one of those environments, the CPL will notice you for sure. So you will get an opportunity if that happens. And I can say that. Experience.
Yeah, and just so you know, scouting and player recruitment also comes with the sidebar of coach ID and coach recruitment, because that player needed somebody to guide them and assist them, and so that doesn't go unnoticed. And it's how transparent that coach is in terms of what they've done with their players. That old saying, the best coaches in the world lose their best players. So. Yeah. That doesn't go unnoticed either. So as teams start to look for additional staffing, new teams look for new staffing, that's got to come into play.
Right on. Yeah. So, and I'll say, I did want to get into some of the questions that have come up in the last few minutes, and maybe Michael, if you have a few more minutes past
Absolutely. Oh no, go ahead. Keep going.
Noon your time. Yeah. Because maybe, we don't need to go exactly 1 hour, but
listen, if I wasn't on this show, I'd have to be painting. So if you know what I mean. So just keep talking.
That's right. Yeah. or getting a haircut or something.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah. Okay. So a couple of questions that have come regarding the women's game. So I thought we would just touch on that. Gonzalo has asked, with Carmelina Moscato spearheading the women's development for CPL and the great job that she's doing and continues to do, what can we expect in the women's side? And we did have another question further up also from Andrew there. Is there an update about CPL? So what can you tell us about the women's game? Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, you probably stole the words right out of my mouth. Carm is, outstanding individual. She's and for those of you who don't know her, she's a great person, very passionate, very committed to her development. She's a great coach. I can tell you that right now. I've always felt she's a great coach. She's doing an incredibly excellent job with League One, and also working in with the Canadian Premier League and the Canadian soccer business component about advancing the women's game. There is no doubt that the first steps from our position is the advancement of the club culture in women's football. There is no doubt that development happens at the club level. The refinement happens at the national team level for national team performance. We need a stronger club structure in this country as it relates to women's football. You don't have to go very far to see the advancements that Mexico, Costa Rica, Panama, some of those areas have done by entering into club activity within their domestic football product. And that has not gone without us understanding that. And I think that is core to CARM's view and to the nation's view as it relates to that. It's time to build a club structure within this country. And you can even see the players are starting to be motivated by that, because some of our best and most promising national team players are now vying their trade in Europe or in the UK. And so that tells you exactly what they're looking for. And as we all know, at the end of the day, the players will dictate where they want to go. And they're sending a message right there. I need club football. And I need it on a consistent basis. And our model needs to change from what it used to be. And so with CARM's help and direction, there's no official stance on where Canadian Premier League would be with women's football, because there's lots of things to do before that. But the best news is we've initiated that through CARM and through the activities that's happening with our group. And we look forward to that engagement and the advancement once we get out of this crisis that we're living in today.
Yeah, it sounds good, and I'm sure everybody on the working on and playing in the female side is looking forward to that. So hopefully some good news in the future. I'd like to just go back to another question. So it's a two-part question actually from Mladen here. Is it possible to put in place contracts between youth players and their clubs? And I'm assuming he's talking the amateur clubs.
Right.
So players don't leave whenever they want. He says, just like that, some players change clubs every few months. And so maybe if you can answer the question and maybe even give your opinion or advice to players that do jump from one club to the next. And what do you think about that?
Well, there's very specific rules and regulations as it relates to FIFA and age restrictions. There is established training compensation requirements set out by FIFA, which are slowly being pushed down into our national federation, and we will be living that world. And in terms of movement, once you enter a professional situation, you have the opportunity to move if that opportunity is presented to you and the club agrees or participates, or as a free agent, all those things. As it pertains to youth clubs, I think one of the things that I've seen from my years at BC Soccer and in that level of the game and moving forward, players move for a couple of different reasons. One is they're being influenced by somebody that the grass is greener on the other side of the fence. To use a football analogy, grass, which all of us probably rarely play on anymore.
What's that?
But the grass is greener on the other side. And they're baited by some competition component. We're going to win this and you're going to be better because of that. Or there is not the quality that is required in the environment. And I do not hold it against any player who feels that they need to move because they are not getting the attention or the quality within their programs. This is where national club licensing assists this process. Lots of work to be done around it, but the concept is to be able to guarantee a standard-based environment for these players, which I think at the end of the day, if you're happy and you're being developed and you're being treated appropriately and there's respect in the environment, I don't see many players moving within that youth environment. It's because we haven't created a more structured environment. All these players are being told, "Oh, come over here because Richard's better than Michael. Richard's got a better program than Michael's program." So once again, I go back to that cannibalization. I wonder how many people would tell a player not to come by saying, "You know what? Michael's a good guy. I think you should stay there," right? And this also has a lot to do with the way our game is structured financially. That it is a pay-to-play environment, and there's revenues involved in clubs, and the more players in, the more revenue can pay for things and those. So it's a big issue. But the two key things for me is take care of your environment as a coach, make sure it's the best environment possible, and don't participate in misleading players based on some dream rather than the quality that you are already or could affect them.
Yeah, I think everyone needs to be honest and transparent, maybe more sometimes, and that's again great advice. And I'll go to a couple of final questions here. So Ramon again has kind of followed up and said, are there plans to have a regional second division in nations there, like League One Ontario in every province? And would it be good to have at least a reserve team of every CPL?
Yes, absolutely. The big vision would be that, you know, let's look at it as the perfect scenario, right? And it can't always be perfect because it's football.
Sure.
But the perfect scenario is that we'd have the League One concept right across the country. That would be the perfect scenario. But the reality of that is numbers, quality, geography, and revenue, and that you've got to remember that next level is you're still working to the semi-professional or professional rank. So it does come into the conversation. This is not a grassroots issue, and it's not a grassroots discussion. So the reality is I think over time we'll be able to address some of the larger markets in the country. There's no doubt when you look at the Ontario scenario, there's no doubt, and the evidence shows that the vast majority of players that are coming out of our country are coming out of Ontario on the numbers. And that's just because of the numbers that are there. And then you have the Quebec scenario, and then you have British Columbia / Alberta. So I would think the best case scenario to begin with is regionalization of that level of play, potential inclusion of CPL club development teams, call them reserves, maybe age specific, whatever, involved in that, but potentially wouldn't be part of the Canadian Championships because that's still an actual club championship. Sure. But just spread out and make, as I say, the fishing pond a little bit bigger and unify that level of play, because by unifying that level of play, it also brings strength to the commercial side of it. It also brings strength to the potential revenue. It also addresses some of the costs as it relates to regionalization and travel. So, you know, look at big markets first, and then you know, have a plan down the road. Can we get there, right? Because you know, we've got issues, geography, and you're not going to get around it. A quick story about that. During my time at BC Soccer and the NTC West director, we were trying to figure out how to address the province, and we'd become very friendly with a colleague of mine in Germany at the DFB, and asked us over to look at what they were doing. And we went into his office, and he had one of those maps on the wall where you draw down each of the countries, you know. And so he told us all about Germany, and he told us all about the extended talent development program they were running at the time, which was part of their transition into their new look German model and methodology to teaching and play. Yeah. And then he asked us, "What are you doing?" And I went up to the map and I pulled down Canada, and I told him where we live, and I said, "What?" And he looked up at it. He says, "No chance." And I looked at him. I said, "What?" He says, "Unless you regionalize your programming, you will not find success." Yeah. So we went back, and so that regionalization really is always stuck in my mind. That it's a situation we can't get away from. We're not going to change our country, but how do we address it? Because it can't be the same answer right across because of the geography. Yeah, it's a great point, and you know, obviously that's a permanent challenge for Canada. It's never going to go away, and you know, hopefully the CPL continues to grow and expand, and there's maybe more clubs in Ontario, maybe more in other parts of the country too. And you know, I would reiterate that a good way to get the league to expand is for everyone to support, right? To watch. Yeah, absolutely.
And become a fan. Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you can't be a fan of other teams too. You know, we've lived that in this country for years, you know, in terms of supporting a big European or a big Asian or a big African team, and or a big, you know, South American team. But why not have our own local community-based activity? And it's all about influence, right? And as our expansion program unfolds, which our ownership group and our senior management take care of, I'm sure it will be driven by influence. How can we influence and connect as best we can.
Great. Okay, so I think I'll wrap it up. Just one more little point here, which was about international players in the CPL. So what's the role for international players? What are the opportunities, and do you see it as a maybe, because I think there's competing opinions about this. Is it good to get some top players from Europe or South America or wherever coming in, because it's going to raise the level of the the Canadians that have to compete with them, or is that going to take away from the opportunities for Canadians, and do we not want the league to go there? What do you think about that?
So you're asking me if we're signing Ronaldo next week? Is that what you're asking?
That's exactly what I want to know, because again, once COVID finishes, he doesn't want to stay
He's
in
done.
Italy.
He's coming. He's coming for sure. No, I think internationally, there's no doubt. I think I've made that statement earlier that this league was based on Canadians, and it was built by Canadians for Canadians, as the little marketing scenario says. But it is true. It was about the Canadian product. It was about that area of the game that we were lacking. As it relates to the international players, I think the game is global. The game today is being influenced by multiple of cultures. That goes to that panoramic comment I made earlier to you coaches out there. The game speaks multiple languages. You should not just be participating in English. You should be participating in multiple languages, i.e. investigate all areas of the game and where you can learn methodology, systems, game models, opinions, whatever it is. That's one thing I really benefited from early, as I decided to look at other areas and places, and it really helped shape what I believe in. But in terms of the international, we're influenced by a number of cultures, and we're influenced by a number of players. And for the league to thrive, we want it to be as competitive as possible. And so you want to try and address that competitive environment. And you do that by introducing a little bit of international influence. The commentary on international players in the league last year is, I think we were too old. I think our cost for those players was unbalanced, and we did not see the performances we thought we'd see out of them. Now, to be fair, that's year one, and we didn't know a lot, and we were unsure. And so you can't blame one group or one team or one coach or one recruitment officer. But what we did do is decide that we wanted to look internationally for some assistance, and we've entered into a partnership agreement with a group called the 21st Club out of the UK, a data-driven evaluation recruitment group who has a very, very strong international reputation, and they've been paramount in our international flavor. So we look at international, we look at domestic, we look at regional. So as I say, we're trying to create all those pieces of the pie. And our look is that we want to also use this opportunity as a revenue source. We feel that we can get younger in the international, which means we can get better. We'll be more competitive, and on top of that, it'll bring eyeballs and to our game, and potentially move players on to other levels of play to help the commercial side and the economics of the game. We were very specific on what we were looking for each team and the assistance we provide them, because again, there's a cost effect there. We don't want them spending a lot of money on that recruitment if they don't have to, because they don't maybe have the money. So that's what we're there for. The department, as I say, under the influence of Oliver Gage, and Jim Easton's been very heavily involved in this, and Oliver, that drives that area for us to make the best decisions and the best guiding principles for our club possible. So when international players do arrive, they're not there just, playing it out, as they say. Okay. And you can see even the MLS has decided they see that. Other than their big DAs, you can see the type of player they're looking at: younger, more opportunity, more competitive, and commercial potential.
I think it fits the same profile, and there's a lot of those in other countries, aren't there?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, you know it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, you know what? It's just about 10 after, and I could probably keep talking to you all day, and I'm sure maybe there's some that would want to listen, but maybe some other people need to get on with their with their day. So I'll just say on behalf of myself and National Soccer Coach Association of Canada and everyone who was listening, thank you so much, Micheal, for taking the time to speak with us and share all your wisdom and experience and knowledge with everyone.
I very much appreciate it. I can tell you, and Richard and I have known each other, and I'm sure I've met a lot of you out there. Coach development and education is forefront in my belief system. From the very first time Alan Church out here in British Columbia gave me an opportunity. I value education. I value it ongoing. We're always learning. We'll continue to learn. So opportunities like this, I'll bite your hand off, Richard, for it. So I appreciate your time. I appreciate everybody's time. And if you have any questions that I didn't answer, I would encourage you to send them to Richard and forward them on to me, Richard. I'd be happy to respond to them. I have no problem. It's an open door policy here in my football world.
Absolutely. And on that note, anyone watching, the session's been recorded. We're going to put it up on our NSCAC website members area, as well as all the future webinars. We're doing this every week now, and we've got a great lineup of coaches, former, current national team coaches, professionals, sports scientists, everything. And we are here, to share knowledge. We've got no secrets here. So please feel free. And I hope maybe we didn't get to every question, but hope everyone that was watching got a lot of value. And again, thank you all so much for your participation. So
fantastic.
Must be lunchtime in BC.
Yeah, it might be. It's raining out here, so hopefully everybody's well. And everybody, please stay safe. And I know it's a frustrating time for football, and hopefully we'll see some movements here in the coming weeks. At least we'll get our players back out and doing at least some sort of activity. But I will say it's an incredibly important time for you and your players too, to keep their thoughts. I always say, if you're in Canadian football, you have to be an optimist. So continue to push that agenda with your players and their hope down the road. So all the best to everybody. And again, Richard, thank you and good luck with the behind the bench.
All right. Great. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.